Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about one of the Worlds of Power books. This one is on Blaster Master. Yes, Blaster Master. I've been getting the name wrong quite a bit. Okay, so let's get into the story. This is one of the early books that uses video games for its narrative, specifically using Blaster Master as its narrative. Reading this book kind of made me want to learn more about Sunsoft's narrative, or at least the narrative that Sunsoft made for it. And, just who was the Blaster Master? Because it's something that you kind of want to know now, but back in the day, nobody really cared too much about. Well, I found out there are two narratives. There's one for the Famicom version, and there's one for the NES version. So the Famicom version, things are very different. The game's manual explains that the vehicle is called the Metal Attacker, and the planet that it comes from is called Sophia the Third. The game takes place in 2052, after the Invum Dark Star army led by Goez has taken over the entire universe with the exception of the planet Sophia the Third. So I can only assume that there's an entire, solar system called Sophia, and this is the third planet in the Sophia star system. I'm guessing. It just seems like a really weird name. And over the course of the game, you save the universe. Assuming that you keep playing. If you just stop, I guess, then you gave up, and the universe is still under control of Dark Star Army. That's just kind of the way it goes. Now, the Western release of it, so like North America, Europe, and everybody else, the game was changed a little bit, so you have like a cutscene or like a slideshow narrative at the beginning that lays out what happened. And it's pretty close to what's in the Worlds of Power book. You play as a kid named Jason and his pet frog named Fred. They fall down into the underworld, and the Metal Attacker is changed to Sophia the Third. So your little tank is now Sophia the Third. I don't know where the other two were, but hey, it's a video game. We're not going to think too much about that. Oh, and Goez is gone, and you now have the bad guy as the plutonium boss, and he has a bunch of underbosses, so you need to work your way down to where he is to kill him. So that's what's laid out in the manuals of the two games. Now, the book, it really does follow the plot of the Western release of the game. It's very, very close. They do expand it a little bit, so you have two additional characters that are added in. Well, three, kind of, but you have Alex, who is another kid that Jason finds in the underground, and you have Eve. And Eve is an alien who apparently brought the Sophia the Third to Earth, and the plutonium boss had destroyed her planet before coming to Earth. There's a little bit more to that, like, I guess, if I'm remembering all this correctly. So Eve was doing a research project on Earth. She broadcast her findings back to her planet. They told her to not send them her location. She does it anyway. Then she goes to her planet to see what's going on, finds out the plutonium boss has destroyed her planet. And then the plutonium boss tells her, thanks, now I'm going to go to Earth. So the plutonium boss goes to Earth to keep feeding on the radiation and everything on the planet. Yeah, it's a little weird, but it is a not really a children's book, but a young adult's book. Let's go with that. So, yeah, the plot doesn't necessarily have to make sense. It just has to be entertaining to somebody who's, in grade school or under the age of 10 or 12. Yeah, let me explain a little. I'll explain a little bit about Scholastic and that stuff later, but let's just stick with the story for right now. So this is a really short book for the most part, and it's pretty easy to read. The plot's okay. It does expand on what the game, at least in the Western releases, cutscene says. So we start off with Jason. He's our main character again, and he kind of gets into trouble when he chases after his pet frog named Fred. So Jason lives near a swamp. So Jason lives near a swamp, and apparently this is like the scary place. This is the creepy old house at the end of the block where, they always tell you to avoid. That's basically what this swamp is. It's your standard, nobody goes there, nobody wants to go there, there's something wrong with that place, just everybody stay away from it. So Fred, his pet frog, escapes his bowl, hops down the street. Jason apparently isn't able to keep up with a pet frog, which, just roll with it, I guess. The frog goes into the swamp, Jason goes after it. The frog starts growing because of the radiation. We still thought that's what happened. And the frog gets pulled down to the underworld. Jason follows it, and that is where he meets Eve. Eve has a completely unpronounceable name. It's Yvtrkizi. So she just tells him to call her Eve, which I think they probably could have just rolled with that anyway. She has a huge issue with the English language. She doesn't really pick up on any of the nuances of it. So Eve is going to use a bunch of words that are out of place and everything. It's pretty funny, and that's kind of the humor that this book is going to bring. It's not going to be all serious or anything like that. So Jason learns how to pilot the Sophia the Third from Eve. Eve ends up getting kidnapped. Prior to her being kidnapped, she kind of explains to Jason, hey, this is what you need to do. We need to collect these things to power up the ship's weapons and whatnot. And she also mentions that another kid had fallen down the hole and he disappeared. And Jason finds that kid. It's Alex. Alex is some kid that Jason knows at school. And together they sort of pilot the Sophia the Third, defeat all the underbosses. And as they get close to the plutonium boss, they discover that the last underboss is Fred, a mutated version of Fred. And Jason has some problems with it, but eventually he defeats Fred. And yeah, it's fine. You also find out that Alex had a pet as well that was kidnapped. But Alex has a pet lobster named Plutarch. That part just kind of broke me a little bit, where I'm like, why does this kid have a pet lobster? Who buys their kid a pet lobster? This is very strange. And then I started thinking, is no one looking for these kids? Because apparently Alex has been gone for a couple of weeks. And that's when I started thinking, well, of course nobody wants to go and find Alex. He's the creepy kid with a pet lobster. I should be nicer to him about his pet lobster, but that was just really frickin' weird. I'll move on. So Alex and Jason find the plutonium boss, and we find out that the plutonium boss basically takes the shape of whatever you fear. So if I looked at it, it would look at one thing. If you looked at it, it would look at something else. And then I started thinking about some other weird stuff. I'm like, gosh, what is it? What if I'm afraid of commitment? What is it going to look like then? Or what if I'm afraid of some other weird abstract thing that doesn't really have a defined shape? What is it going to look like? And then I realized it doesn't matter because this is a young adult's book and I'm digging way too deep into it. I'm reading this a good 20 years, well, actually longer than that, a good 30 years after I probably should have read it, but it doesn't matter. It's a fun story, and there's just a lot of... everything kind of gets wrapped up really quickly. So they end up defeating the plutonium boss. They shut down his machine that he was going to use to steal all the radiation on the planet. And yeah, we have kind of a happy moment. The Earth is saved. Alex can go back to being the weird kid with a pet lobster. Jason can go back to being the kid with a pet frog. And I'm going to assume that those are the only friends that these two kids had, because nobody goes looking for them at all, but whatever. And, it ends on kind of a happy moment. Jason wakes up, realizes that, he kind of thinks like everything was a dream. He goes downstairs, and he gets scared by Alex, who's wearing like a frog mask and whatnot, and he kind of freaks out. And then he finds that miraculously his pet frog made it back. Plutarch, the pet lobster, made it back, and Eve made it out of there alive. So everybody made it out, everybody's okay, and the story kind of wraps up with that happy moment. We're not going to explain how they, they do kind of say, well, we'll just say Eve is my cousin or something like that. Because Eve's an alien who thankfully looks human, so there's not going to be too many questions asked, but people are going to wonder where this kid came from. Or at least I would. I would want to know why this child is here and why it magically thinks that... Whatever. There's just so many questions that would need to be asked. And it's kind of funny that I think about those now, because I definitely would not have thought about this when I was a kid. So that was the narrative. Let's talk a little bit about Scholastic books and also FX9. We'll do FX9 first. Like FX9 was a pen alias for about 5 different authors. So the Worlds of Power books had 10 books in the series. Each of them are authored by FX9, or at least the pen alias of FX9. In total, a total of 5 authors wrote these 10 books, and they're all pretty well done. Now, the person who's kind of responsible for the Worlds of Power books and came up with the FX9 moniker is a guy named Seth Godin. Like, he was sort of the producer of the series. It was his idea. He pushed it through and got Scholastic books to make all of these. And I'm glad that he did. They're really kind of cool. Now let's talk about Scholastic books really quick. The Worlds of Power books were something I would have found at one of their little book fairs that they would have in my elementary school. I don't know if they still do this, but Scholastic books would go to different elementary schools, and they were at mine, I think all the way up to 6th grade. They would come to our schools. They'd wheel in these big metal shelves, open them up, and they would just be full of books, like anything you would want, like novels, coloring books, a bunch of different things would be in there. And if you had money, you could go in there and buy as many as you wanted. And it seemed like everybody knew when the book fair was coming. And yeah, it was a pretty cool time at school. At least it got me into reading a bunch of different stuff. I mostly looked for the Goosebump books and other horror stories at the time. I don't ever remember seeing Worlds of Power on the shelves, but they had to have been on there. They were probably... because these came out in the early 90s, so I most likely would have seen them and just kind of passed them by because I just didn't really think too much about it. Which is kind of a shame, because I think they were about $3 back then, and that would have been a lot cheaper than trying to find them now, because for what you get, a lot of the prices that are asked are pretty ridiculous, especially on the used market. You'll find them anywhere from like $10 to $30, which is just absurd. What I didn't know was there were also Sega books like this, and I'll get into those more later on, because I'll kind of read through some of those later. That's for a completely different video, but that's kind of an overview of like what Scholastic Books was and who FX9 is. Okay, so let's get into some of my final thoughts on this book. I thought it was a lot of fun to read. It really was just a short, entertaining book that While I didn't read it when I was little, there's a lot in it to really kind of take away. It's a fun way to introduce sort of video games to kids. And yeah, it does a really good job of sticking with a lot of the tropes that other young adult books have, where the kid really is the hero. There's not going to be too much danger going on. You know, everything's going to get wrapped up at the end. And in this case, they did a really good job of kind of expanding on the plot for Blaster Master to really stretch this game into being like a short novella type book. It's pretty fun. I really did enjoy reading it, and I'm looking forward to getting into some of the other Worlds of Power books. So that's going to wrap things up, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everybody. Bye.